Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Inside Specialization, our series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. In each episode, members of ATA's Professional Development Committee will interview translation and interpreting specialists. They'll ask about what the work entails, what skills are needed, the pros and cons, and so much more. The goal is to showcase the variety of career paths in translation and interpreting and help working professionals and students understand what's out there, how they can get started, and what they need to succeed. Specialization is arguably the best way to strengthen your translation and interpreting business and stand out from the crowd. We're hoping to bring you one episode a month, and we hope you'll join us on this informative journey. This podcast is brought to you by the American Translators Association. If you'd like to know more about ATA, we'll have some information at the end of the show. All right, now over to the PD Committee and this edition of Inside Specialization.
Hi, and welcome to Inside Specialization, a feature of the ATA podcast on specialization and diversification. My name is Charo, Welle, and I am Deputy Chair of ATA's Professional Development Committee. It is great to have this series as a special collaboration between the ATA podcast and ATA's Professional Development Program. In this episode, I have the pleasure to interview Deborah Wexler, the current administrator of the ATA Audiovisual Division, to talk about audiovisual translation, a very specialized field in which Deborah is highly experienced and recognized. Deborah Wexler is an ATA certified English into Spanish translator and editor with more than 20 years of experience, specializing in audiovisual translation and Spanish orthography. She has translated and reviewed over 6,000 program hours for television, VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, streaming media, and the big screen. She is the Director of Localization of the Americas at Pixelogic Media, as well as the co-founder and administrators of ATA's Audiovisual Division. If you meet Deborah, you will encounter a warm, encouraging colleague and an outstanding collaborator, always willing to lend a hand and mentor her peers. Deborah, welcome.
Thank you, Charo, and thank you for that very, very warm sentence right there at the end.
It is very genuine, and it is great to have you, Deborah. For your first question, what is your definition of audiovisual translation? And briefly, could you tell us what led you to specialize in this field?
Well, audiovisual translation involves an audiovisual asset, for example, a video. It is a term that really is really large and encompasses many fields. For example, we have subtitling, we have the creation of templates, we have a creation of closed captioning files for the deaf or hard of hearing community. We have the translation and adaptation for dubbing. We have also audio description or simple transcription. So there's many things going on in audiovisual translation. And what led me to this field? Well, when I was small, I used to see a name at the end, a credit at the end of the subtitled movies. Her name was Perla Moctezuma. I never met Perla, never ever met Perla, but I always said, oh, I wish I could do what Perla does. And I do.
Well, that's a great story, Deborah. Thank you so much. And what kind of skills translators should put forward to specialize as audiovisual translators?
Since it varies so much, I could say the general ones is the ones that are going to be very obvious to everybody, which are you need to know a lot of, you need to know your craft as translator. You do need to be a translator to go into this field, not just bilingual. And you need, we specialize in the oral part. So when you translate audiovisual content, you have to, especially scripted, you have to be very, very mindful in communicating the way somebody would communicate with their mouth instead of on a book or on a text. That's on one part of it. The other one is you need to be professional writers, because what you type is what is going to be streaming or published or in a DVD, in a Blu-ray. It really, you really need to be a professional writer, not just want to be really with all your passion an audiovisual translator. You have to be a professional writer.
That makes sense. So Matt Baird, ATA podcast host, interviewed you in 2019 at ATA 60 in Palm Springs. Episode 38 for those who would like to check it out. During the interview, you described, as you just did at the beginning, several secondary specializations such as voiceover or dubbing, audio transcription, which involves subtitling and closed captioning. Considering how broad the audiovisual industry is, why might a translator go in one direction or the other?
I think it's pretty much by chance. Not that much by chance, but a door will open for you. When you're looking into audiovisual translation, you usually do it starting in subtitling, because there's more subtitlers than any other discipline. And then from there, you start networking and knowing more and more people. But normally is who you know. That's the way it is right now. If you know another, for example, if you meet a writer of the scripts for audio description and you become friends, they will hook you up with a job. Maybe they know a client who's looking to train a new person. And that's the way you enter through these doors in audiovisual translation.
I see. So with so many options, novices might get overwhelmed. Is there a proven path for getting started?
Well, not really a proven path, but you do need to train. You need to train. So the steps would be, you need to train. Then when you're trained, you need to test for the several companies. And you should start from the bottom up testing. You test in the smaller companies and then you work your way up to the larger companies. And that will ensure that you are growing in the discipline. If you just say, oh, I'm going to go test with the biggest, greatest company in the world for subtitling, and then you don't pass the test, you will always be in that database as not having passed the test. It is very, very, very hard to get retested. So start small.
Great advice. What are a couple of strategies translators can apply to narrow down their secondary specialization choices?
Okay, the secondary specialization choices within the audiovisual translation, I'm guessing you're asking me if they go to dubbing, if they go to subtitling. I think networking is the best strategy. If you meet people who do this for a living and you can ask them 100 questions, what do you do for what does a subtitle day look like? What do they do? What does your weekend look like? All of those questions that a novice would have, if they meet the people who do this, that will allow us to narrow down what they really want to do. I would say a very good way of doing this, to start doing this, in the audiovisual division, we have a mentoring program, which is free for ATA members and division members. So they can communicate with us and we can get them a tutor. I'm sorry, not a tutor, a mentor, and which is somebody who's going to be able to answer all of these questions. And then we also have virtual meetups, and now during the pandemic, virtual meetups, but as soon as the world opens up again, we'll go back to, we were having real meetups in different cities every month all over the world. Just network with those audiovisual translators. That will get them in a very good place to be able to narrow down their secondary specialization choices.
Those are great couple of strategies, and great to mention the mentoring through the audiovisual division. Some specializations leverage one another, and translators benefit from exploring, acquiring, and mastering other skills beyond their current expertise. Would you say that audiovisual translators are by default localization savvy, or must they become savvy in localization to be effective audiovisual translators?
Well, I can say that localization savvy translators should go into subtitling. You do need that skill. But localization is really such a really general term. What they need to be is professional writers. If they are, they'll get the localization bit down pat really fast.
Okay, briefly, what does a basic audiovisual translation process looks like from start to finish?
Briefly, well, this is too broad. This is too broad of a question, but let me give you two examples. I'll tell you for subtitling and then for dubbing.
Okay.
For subtitling, if the video is in English, there's transcription, and then there's spotting, which is putting an in time and an out time to the subtitles. Then there's translation. Then there's QC translation. Then client revisions, and then publishing. For example, that's for subtitling, very briefly. For dubbing, you have the transcription, the dialogue list spotting, which is different from the subtitling spotting, then the translation of the dialogue list, then the QC of the dialogue list, and then it goes to dubbing studios, and then it gets adapted. For example,
last year, I was privileged to attend your E71 Advanced Specialization Training AST in subtitling. Subtitling involves specific technologies and techniques for increasing speed and productivity. Could you describe one of these techniques that you consider a must-have?
Yes, for increasing speed and productivity in subtitling, I would say across the board in audiovisual translation, you have to be able to manage software, most likely. Even a cloud program, which are very friendly. So two things that you can do, and anybody should do it, even non-audiovisual translators, any kind of translators, I would say, challenge yourself to increase your typing speed and use macros for shortcuts. For example, a subtitling translator will have to press a lot of buttons or menu commands to create a subtitling file in subtitling software. If you don't use shortcuts, you are going to be using your mouse all day long, thousands of times, and that will slow you down. So if you can just drop your mouse and go to shortcuts, that will get you where you want to be faster, and you'll be more productive. And if you challenge yourself to type faster, you'll also, well, you'll make more money because you're typing faster. I know several translators who have the potential, are just so excellent and have the potential of earning more, but they don't, just because their typing slows them down, and that's quite a shame.
Well, that makes sense, and I do remember you stressing the macros and the shortcuts during the AST. Could you tell us what has been your favorite audiovisual project?
Oh my goodness, I don't know which one has been my favorite, but I can tell you which one has been the most difficult one. The most difficult one was a movie called Memento. I think the director is Christopher Nolan. It is a movie about where the timeline, half of the movie goes from left to right, and the other half of the movie goes from right to left, and then they crisscross. Every scene crisscrosses the other. So the timeline is so difficult that I had to translate the full movie and then break it up into little pieces and put a timeline, all the timeline from left to right, so I could review myself and not give away anything where I shouldn't be giving away. So that's my most difficult project ever.
Thank you so much for sharing that and tell us the name of the movie. Thank you. What is one specific challenge audiovisual translators could face as they work in this field?
I think a challenge, they will see that a challenge is proofing their own work. It is not the same thing to proof, for example, something that if you're translating a document for a client, let's just say an email for a client, is not that same proofing that if you're proofing something that is going to be printed in a Blu-ray. I feel like the pressure is more. I think that will be a challenge. They will need to make it very mechanic, following certain steps, so they don't let typos go through.
That makes sense too. Lastly, what special advice would you give an audiovisual translator who wishes to remain marketable in an increasingly growing audiovisual translation industry? How do they go about remaining marketable and on demand?
I think if I were only to say a single thing about what they should do, is to not be late with files. When I mentor new audiovisual translators, I always tell them that the audiovisual translator has two jobs. One, to do a good translation, and two, to be on time. Not to be condescending, but I'm just realistic. Whenever you have audiovisual translators that are late with files, the deadlines are so tight and the client's so demanding that usually those translators just don't get called again. They will not remain marketable for long if they do deliver their files late. Also, I would also say polish your writing skills every year, maybe grammar classes, writing classes, for example, and as well, read a lot in your language. You need, as an audiovisual translator, you have to be constantly modernizing your vocabulary, because you're going to the orality of the language. You're responding to what people would say right now at this moment. And if you're not constantly reading and listening to young people, and if you don't modernize your vocabulary, you're going to start writing, typing, creating audiovisual content in a register that is just too high and doesn't match the content any longer.
These are great advices, especially you're stressing again being professional writers, keeping up their language they're translating to, and also productivity and being on time. So thank you, Deborah, for all these great tips for people seeking to specialize. And it was great to learn more about the specialization in audiovisual translation. And we really appreciate your time and generosity. I am sure that our listeners will find your insights beneficial and enriching. Thank you, Deborah.
And Charo, thank you for being here and for inviting me and to the ATA and the program and the podcast, for having me. It's an honor for me. Thank you, Charo.
It is a pleasure.
You've been listening to Inside Specialization, our series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. Big thanks to everyone involved in the production of this episode. ATA's PD committee developed and coordinated the interview. Mixing and editing was done by Derek Platts. Mary David and Rashawn Paccarel at ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. Now, if you learned anything new in today's podcast, I bet there's somebody out there who would like to know it too. Don't be stingy. Tell them about us. I've gotten to know so many great podcasts that way. I promise they'll thank you for it. And if you're not an ATA member, listen up. I've been a member for over 20 years. I can honestly say that ATA launched my freelance career, and I've never looked back. Nowadays, the demand for translators and interpreters is at an all-time high, but finding quality work isn't easy. ATA membership can make a difference. And ATA isn't just for translators or interpreters. Individuals, companies, and organizations can become members. We have teachers, professors, hospital administrators, language company owners, technology developers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. Go to ATA's website, atanet.org, for details. Or check out past episodes of this podcast where we talk about the benefits of membership and what's currently happening in the association. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.